Hey everyone, this is part two of the video series on resolving complex emotional wounds. In the past session, we talked about core wounds and how those are formed and how they can manifest. If you didn't catch that, it'll definitely help in making sense of this video, where we're going to talk more about the numbing that occurs after the core wounding and the false or protective self that gets born from that. I did get a little bit of feedback from the first video. I've never done that before, so the first feedback was to talk louder. I guess I'm sort of soft-spoken, so I just put in these headphones, and so hopefully that makes it louder. I did test on my Mac, and you guys are right. It was very, very soft. The second feedback was asking why I'm making the videos from my bed. I live in a city, so my whole apartment is a bed. That's the glory of living in the city. The alternative would be to make the videos in my bathroom, which isn't good for anybody. So I wanted to get started actually with one of the questions that came in about the last video, which was I had talked a little bit about returning to the place where things feel good or having kind of a baseline in the past that we mentioned when we can remember when things felt good and we're not able to get back to that point. We feel separate from that person. And a few people asked me, well, I don't even have that baseline to get back to. I've felt like this for as long as I could remember. And they wanted to know, well, does that mean that this is hopeless for me? And of course not. I want to make it clear that regardless of whether or not these wounds go back to like early childhood or an abusive relationship or anything like that, all of this is applicable to you, and just don't worry about it. I think the more we talk through all of this, the more you're going to see that it doesn't really matter where your starting point was. It's much more about where we're going to end up. The first thing that usually occurs after a core wound, if we don't have the emotional tools to heal it yet, is that our bodies and minds kind of work together to numb it out. Because if you think about bodies as basically a survival mechanism, they experience something painful, and it could be a physical, not just emotional thing, and they know how to make that better and to heal it. But the problem is when we don't have the tools to heal those things, they sort of make these makeshift solutions for us. And this is, from my experience, it's almost a universal thing that our genetics and who we are sort of activate in times of stress, especially when it comes to trauma and complex trauma, in ways that are trying to help us. And so as we move forward, I really don't want anyone to feel badly or judge themselves for how their minds and bodies may have reacted, because it's different for everyone. And again, it's a protective thing. It's not a bad thing. It's certainly nothing that you should feel negatively about yourself towards. But that numbing can occur in all sorts of different ways. It can sort of come across as like, oh, well, I feel this like tightness. For me, it was this tightness that I felt in my heart, like 24/7. And it wasn't like a bad thing. It wasn't good. I just knew that something was off because I had never felt that before. But it really was from the second I woke up to the second I went to bed, there was just this constant tight feeling. There was none of the shame or inadequacy or self-doubt or any of that stuff that I talked about in the first video. All of that was almost temporary, and then this tightness took over. And going along with it, there was all sorts of other weird personality and behavioral changes. I isolated a lot. I spent a lot of time in my head. I loved thinking of different characters and book ideas, and I would fantasize about these characters and how they interacted, and all these things that really kept my mind going like a million miles an hour, and kept me in this world that wasn't exactly real. And whenever I would try to relate to that feeling in my heart, I would see it as this almost like projection of a little boy that I would try to talk to. And, from a third party perspective, you see like, well, that's not really like based in reality. But my point is, when you're in that moment, you don't see things from that perspective because you're viewing everything from the lens of this numbing and from this sort of protective self that takes over. So mine was kind of weird, but I think there's a lot of numbing and protection that happens that a lot of people can resonate. And some of the most common words with numbing that I hear and that I come across from other people doing this kind of work are numbness, emptiness, tightness, this sort of like squeezing. A big one is just, I don't know, but it's not right. Some people describe like a dead zone or almost like a black hole or a void. These are all things that you definitely want to be aware of where you're feeling them in your body. I said this in the last video, I'm going to say it again because it's important. All really common places where you're going to feel these things, and you may not know that it's not the correct thing to feel if you felt it all your life, but you want to look at like your stomach, your core, your heart, and even things that are going on up in, this region and throat, and things that just feel either like they shouldn't be there or like something is off. And something being off is more than enough, but because that's really what the numbing does. The numbing says what you're feeling right now is intolerable and it's unbearable, and we're not really functioning like this, so we're just going to kind of shut it off. And if you think about like a crash on a highway, what the body is doing is sort of it's closing off the highway and it's saying, okay, there's a really bad crash here. There's like a 50 car pileup, but instead of cleaning up the pileup, the body is just like, well, I don't know what this is, so we're just going to reroute everyone off of the highway for the next however many years. And every time you try to check in on the highway, it's like, no, we're not going there. We're just going to keep going elsewhere. So different parts of you almost start to activate and overcompensate in order to make up for that wounding. And the more time that goes on, the more normal this starts to feel. Nothing that I'm describing is really like a conscious process. When the body makes that numbing decision, it's making it for you. It's not something that you've said, hey, body, let's just like numb out this part of me, because that nobody would do that. So that's something really important we want to keep in mind with the numbing. The next piece, and this can be kind of the hardest thing to see from an outside lens because we're viewing everything from the lens of this protector, is that a protector does sort of start to take over. And the protector's entire purpose is to make sure that that pain never happens again. Like I mentioned in the last video, this isn't a great way to stop pain from happening because in doing so, you're just always keeping the pain inside of you and trying to make it not happen again. But it's the best that the body knows how to do because it's learned this from almost like an evolutionary standpoint of, oh, this very painful thing happened. I was, rejected or replaced or neglected or abused, and I need to make sure that I never do anything that's going to get me in that situation again. Um, the challenge is that these protectors that take over really they may serve a purpose when we don't know any other way, but it's not a great way to do things. It's sort of maladaptive of a coping way to deal with something that happened a long time ago. Some of the most common ones that we see, you'd see this all over the world, is perfectionism. So if someone has a sense that they're defective that lives inside of them, they're just always driven by this need to sort of do everything right, do it perfectly, and make sure that everything they're doing is, just according to exactly the way they think it should be done. And if they make the most tiny mistake or anything doesn't look like perfect or anything like that, there's all this dread and anxiety that comes out, and they're sort of back to square one. Where, we talked about in the core wound, you have that dread that seeps in that just tells you this isn't good and I need to get out of this. And perfectionism makes the most sense, like from a logical standpoint. If you have a part of you that says, I'm imperfect, then you have another part of you that tries to prove that you are perfect. And that is what the protector does that takes over. There's all sorts of names for it. In psychology and spirituality, it's the false self, the ego, the protective self, whatever you want to call it, it doesn't really matter. But it's this thing that's doing all of this thinking for you to avoid suffering from happening again. Another really common one that we see, especially in the abusive relationship recovery community, is codependency. People hear codependency. I heard codependency first, and I was like, "Well, that's offensive. Like, you shouldn't label people with something because they've been through a bad experience. That's victim blaming." But when I actually read the book called Codependent No More, I was like, "Oh, oops, I resonate with most of what's being said here." So I ate my words, and I don't know that it's true for anyone else, but it's not saying that you deserve anything bad to happen to you. It's sort of just this sense of over responsibility for the emotions and feelings of others. And this again is a big thing of what the protector does, is it focuses externally. It keeps you distracted all the time, 24/7, so that you're focused on other people, things, accomplishments. even addictions, so that you're not focused internally, so that there's this lack of internal experience. And that's what the numbing does, because they work together. Your mind's going like this, your body's going like this, and it's sort of this, it's almost clever, the way it works, but it's not clever when you're in the midst of it and you keep having the same things happen over and over again, and you wonder, why me? What's wrong with me? And so codependency, you just see a lot of focus on other people's needs and no focus on your own needs. And there's this kind of constant guilt or dread anytime you assert yourself or anytime you say something that you think you need. And it's, again, it doesn't sound like a bad thing, but really what it is an attempt to avoid that shame from happening again. You think if you can do everything right and if you can give everyone exactly what they want and do everything exactly the way they want it, then you'll be loved. And that's the way that wound has sort of adapted to get its needs met, is to just meet everyone else's needs. And so that's something that, that's a big one. If you resonate with that, I highly recommend looking more into that. Um, Complex PTSD, especially after cluster B relationships, is another one that I've spent a lot of time working with and probably experienced some of myself. And it sort of gets into this, again, external mode where it's very, very heavily focused on the perpetrator. So, um, and of course, there's nothing wrong with sharing your story or making sense of what happened, but it gets to the point where the perpetrator is kind of like becomes the entire life. It's everything that you think about. There's this like obsession with like cluster B disorders and psychopaths or narcissists, and people asked recently why Psychopath 3 went private and why I don't really write about psychopaths that much anymore. And it's honestly just because I noticed my mind going way too much in that direction. And in doing so, was still lacking that awareness of what was going on inside. And this is one of those things that the protective self will keep doing, is it gets you into the same situation over and over again, and you keep telling yourself, oh no, but it's just because it happened this way this time. If the other person had just done that, or if this thing had just happened this way, then I would be fine. Mindfulness is a really great way to do this, is becoming aware of those distractions. It's like when I first started getting into all of this stuff, I wasn't aware of what I was doing. I was like taking on a million new things at once. I wanted to work harder, write more books, accomplish more, all of these things to prove that I was adequate and that I did all of these cool things. And you couldn't have stopped me. In my mornings, I'd have my coffee and I'd be like on this high of just like ready to go and take on the world. And I just thought I had it all figured out except for this little tightness in my chest. No big deal. Um, but underneath that tightness was a lot of stuff that needed talking to. And so don't get caught in the trap of thinking, oh, well, I'm totally fine except for this sort of like discomfort I have in my stomach or this weird feeling that I have in my chest. Really make sure that you're addressing those things. And what that takes is actually becoming aware of the distractions that are being thrown at you. The protector is always going to say something to you like, if you just do this one thing, it's always do something, then you're going to feel good. It's sort of like, that fishing pole that you hold with like the thing at the end that you always want to get to, and you get to it, but it's just never enough. But the crazy thing is, even once you get there and you realize, oh, that didn't work that time, it still convinces you that if you do it again differently the next time, then it'll be fine. And that's why when people keep saying, why do I always end up in these same relationships with these awful people or these people who don't appreciate me or they use me, they're ending up in these same situations because the protector is in charge and doing the same stuff over and over and over again. So if you're always clinging on to this idea that you're not enough, that lives underneath the surface, it may not even be something consciously felt, then the protector is always trying to prove that you're enough. And so it's going overboard. It's like focusing on other people's needs. It's accomplishing too much. It's like always trying to prove, hey, I am enough. I'm adequate. And in doing so is attracting people that you're never enough for because most people don't need you to do all of those things in order to love you. And the problem is you find people maybe that do like you just the way you are, and it doesn't feel right. You're like, well, this is too easy. This should be this big, dramatic, wonderful thing. And that's really where people get caught up when we have old rejections that live inside of us. That wound and the protector is really never fully satisfied. And so when these patterns keep happening over and over and over again, this is another really good sign that there's a wound inside of you that has not been resolved yet, because it keeps trying to resolve itself by recreating situations that probably happened a long time ago and then being like, what the heck? Why do I keep ending up in these situations? That's so unfair. This is not like the way things should be. But it's because the wound and the protector, even though they at one point were meant to help you, they reinforce themselves. The wound exists and says that there's something wrong with you. The protector keeps trying to prove that there's not something wrong with you, and in doing so, keeps going after and finding situations and people that prove that there's something wrong with you. And then it gets to stay in charge. It says, see, people can't be trusted, or I always end up in this situation, or I always make bad decisions. And the protector just gets to say, yes, I'm right. I'm always right, and I need to always be in control. And that's what it all comes back to, is that the protector is keeping you in control. Because at one point, that chaos happened, and it was intolerable. It was unbearable, and you can never be brought back to that place. And or at least that's what the protector is trying to convince you. And it will do anything to keep you out of that place. It will scare you, it will trick you, it will distract you, because it doesn't want to go back to that place when things were so chaotic. And again, it's a nice thing that it's trying to do, but in order to make any progress, we have to start becoming aware of how it's operating. Once you do start learning mindfulness, Tara Brach is one of my favorite mindfulness coaches. She has lots of free podcasts. I think any resource that's free is something that you should be looking at, because the people who have been through this stuff just want you to have it for free too, because they want you to feel light and happy the way that they've found it. And so I really recommend her stuff. It's very gentle, very kind. Her books are great too. But what the mindfulness does is it lets you build almost a second layer. So if we think of this as layers, the first layer is this wound that happened. Okay, that gets stuck. This next layer is this numbing that happens, so you can't really like feel what's going on inside of it. And then you get this other layer of this distractor that is just all over the place. It's just like always keeping you focused externally, always focused on, resentment, rumination. And what we want to do is add on one more layer on top of all of that mess, which is mindfulness. And that is just totally non-judgmental awareness of what it's doing. That's it. Like, hey, this is like really weird how this keeps happening, and how I tend to end up in this situation over and over again. Or this is how a big one is how you approach healing, right? Like if you're approaching healing through the lens of this protector, because up until this point, the protector is you. That's how you identify with the world and as yourself. And so everything, even the choices that it makes around healing, are going to be from the protector's perspective. So you have to be able to kind of get that extra layer around the protector so that it stops being in charge, because it's not in charge. It wants to be in charge, but we're humans. We have consciousness, we have awareness, and that's one of the coolest parts about being human, is that we can start to shift how that dialogue goes internally. So healing wise, codependents a lot of times are really attracted to this idea that they just need to forgive everyone and everything's going to go back to normal. All of their love and compassion is going to cure the world and cure the person who abused them or neglected them or treated them badly. And they go do that, and they reach out to the person, they say, I forgive you, or they let them back into their life. And lo and behold, the person keeps doing exactly what they used to do. They hurt the person, they treat them badly. And the codependent would say, oh, this is so unfair. Why does this always happen? I did all the right things and I was so kind. That is healing from the perspective of a protector, of trying to be so selfless and so focused on everyone else's needs that they should love you. And unless you can slow down and see how it's keeping you on this hamster wheel over and over and over again, it's the same thing on repeat, you're going to stay stuck. And that's really tough, because getting that awareness just takes a lot of times failure. We talked about the kid with the hot stove analogy last time, and I'm like the kid that just kept touching the stove over, and I'm like, ow, that hurt. I'll just touch it again, see what happens. Maybe it'll be different this time. Eventually, you get so hurt and messed up from those things that happen that you realize, like, I had to be like, well, I'm the common denominator here. This is definitely not the rest of the world now. Something is going on in here that is not correct. And so that's where we want to get. So as soon as we become aware of it, we can start making really, really cool and also pretty fast changes. So however, if you look at your life, and you start to look at how maybe you have been distracted, and this could be through accomplishments or perfectionism or helping or caretaking other people. Caretaking is a big one. It goes along with codependency. It's all of these false bursts of self-worth of like, oh, well, I'm helping this person, so I feel good about myself now and I've done something good. And it's great to want to help people. You should want to help people. But with caretaking, it's almost this like high that people reach where they're like, oh, well, I do so much for this person. I take care of them and I manage their life for them and all of their emotions. And every time they have outbursts, they always come to me and I'm the person who helps them through it. And that's just, it's a huge distraction from your own internal issues. And it really does keep you unable to make progress on your own. It keeps the other person unable to make progress because they basically have a crutch that's preventing them from actually growing and healing in any meaningful way. Really, the thing with mindfulness is that we want to become comfortable with discomfort. That's the main piece that we want to do there. We don't want to try to tell ourselves that we should be feeling something or try to guide towards feeling something. It's just being okay with whatever is going on inside. And the more okay we are with it, the more the body starts to reveal its truth to you. So this is a lot of information that I've thrown out here. I just wanted to get it all out there because I do think that the numbing and the protector are two really big parts that it's hard to move forward if we're not aware of how it's happening. So I hope this is helpful. If you have any questions, please do let me know on the Facebook page or the comments in the YouTube video. I'm going to do my best to incorporate them into the future videos. Moving forward with part 3, it should be really exciting because we move past this sort of darker blech stuff into the good stuff, which is resolving all of this. And so I don't really have the approach of healing these things because they're not even right to begin with. It's like you've absorbed something, a message about yourself that's just not true. So you can't heal that. It's just wrong. And so when we move forward, this is a lot of what we're going to talk about is getting back into that space where things got numbed out and distracted a long time ago and doing it a little differently this time. So that's it from me. I know this video is a little bit long, but do comment if you have any questions on what was talked about today and anything that I can help to clarify on. I'm doing my best to check YouTube and to check Facebook and really tailor these videos around the feedback that I'm getting. Someone even complained that I was wearing a hoodie and I shouldn't be wearing a hoodie. And yeah, so I am listening. I'm trying. So I hope you all have a great weekend and I'll upload the next video shortly. Thanks.